Hello there, my lovelies. How's it going? How are we doing? My name's Boomy and you're watching my channel, Boomy Reactions. Now, today, guys, we're going to be catching up with another Wendigoon video. So, this one has been requested through Buy Me a Coffee from a Sea of Whiskey. Thank you, my lovely. I like your name. And you say, hi, Boomy. I avoided suggesting Wendigoon because his videos are rather long. But since I see you're doing longer reactions now, I can recommend this history video. Absolutely. Do you know what? As long as you guys are still with me at the end of the whole hour and 20 minutes, I am more than happy to watch some of the longer Wendigoon videos. I think they're fascinating. I do love his channel as well. So I don't mind. As long as you guys don't mind watching me chatter on for another hour, absolutely fine. This history video, it covers an event toward the end of World War II when the Nazis, part of the regular army, Americans and POWs joined forces and fought against the Nazi SS. Did I read that? What? Okay, so German forces teamed up with the Americans and POWs and fought Nazis. Okay, we've got Nazis fighting Nazis with Americans and POWs. What? I don't think I've ever heard of this. I'm baffled. I'm lost. This actually happened. I've never heard of it before. Oh, good. I imagine, was there a point toward the end of the Second World War where, I don't know, there were some officers, German officers, that, you know, maybe they could see the liberation, they could see how the war was progressing, what kind of way it was going to go, and they actually didn't really agree with Hitler and other Nazi officers. They just didn't really believe what they were doing was right. So maybe they switched sides. Am I far off? I can't actually think of another reason why that would happen. Anyway, I'm sure we'll find out all about it in the video, so let's watch it together, guys. And my lovelies, if you are enjoying these reactions, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you very much. If you're interested, guys, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, and that link is over here. Let's crack on.
Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about what is, in my opinion, the most overlooked battle of World War II, and that is the Battle of Castle Itter. And you read the title right. This is a battle in which the Americans and Germans teamed up to save a group of French celebrities.
French celebrities! Yes, I've just noticed the title of the videos. This is the Battle of Castle Itter. Not Itter, Itter, okay.
Every aspect of this battle is wild, from the events that led up to the battle taking place, to the people involved, obviously, to even how it turned out in the end. Like, trust me, by the end of this thing, it's going to be so weird. You're going to love it. But to set the stage for how all of this came together, I need to explain some of the circumstances at the end of World War II that allowed an alliance like this to take place. Okay. So the end of World War II was a very weird time for the Germans. Yeah. If you were a German in Berlin fighting the Russians, good luck, because the Russian destruction of not only the city of Berlin, but of the German High Command kind of dismantled the entire army. Because of that, if you were a German soldier on the Western Front who was responsible with keeping the Americans and British at bay, then you kind of just had to figure it out. By the end of April, Hitler was already dead, and the only commands coming from up top were to just hold out. So as you could imagine, several of the Germans began to see the writing on the wall and realized the war was almost over. Now, your options for what you did going forward mostly depended on your position during the war. The two main distinctions, and for all of my World War II fanatics like myself, I realize that this is an oversimplification and that there were more factions, but for the sake of the video, this is all that's important. There were two main types of German soldiers: the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS. The Wehrmacht, and again I know I'm oversimplifying, was essentially the army. It was the primary composure of most of the fighting forces for Germany during World War II, whereas the SS was a fighting force directly formed from the Nazi Party. Meaning not only were they a typically more elite force than the standard Wehrmacht troop, but during the war they performed more of the party's objectives, like, you know, war crimes. So
so they were, I don't want to say specialized. they were more specialized towards the fascist principles, more veering towards that side. I guess the extremism, whereas the other faction is more Germany's military. Am I right? Have I understood that?
Because of that, as
Basic
the war was
simplification, I
ending,
know.
the Wehrmacht had a pretty good chance if they just surrendered. Typically, during most modern wars, once the war's over, people who were just veterans of the other side aren't treated too harshly,
Yeah.
as long as they were typically just military combatants. Now,
Doing as they're told.
things that the SS did are seen as a little less favorable to politics and history, like, you know, the Holocaust. So as the war in Europe was ending in early May of 1945, several of the Wehrmacht troops began to surrender, while several of the SS dug in and were prepared to fight to the end. And it's within that setting of Wehrmacht and SS troops stationed on the northern border of Austria in the Tyrol region that our story takes place. And what better place to
Right.
begin our story than with the story of Castle Itter itself?
Castle Itter. Right. Okay. So yeah, this is an example of towards the end of the war, the you know, inside fracturing. Um, yeah. Okay.
And speaking of castles with weird towers, how about this tower? Do you know what this tower is? This tower is the phenomenal work that you guys have done on the Kickstarter. For those that don't know, I am making a movie with the writer and director of the SCP Overlord and SCP Dollhouse films.
Oh!
And you guys have been incredibly generous and have pushed this to a stupendous level. And I cannot thank you enough. We still got a way to go. We're still not done, but it warms my heart to see me do something that I enjoy and that I'm passionate about, and you all to put so much faith and trust and money into it, like directly backing it, means the world in a way I could never fully explain. And thank you all for that. Like I said, we still got a way to go. I'm very excited for this. For those that don't know, I will link the video where I discuss the project in detail in the description, but it is going to be a horror action film set within the universe of the Stalker video game franchise. It's going to be cool, trust me. And we are currently running a Kickstarter for it that has all the information you can be into, as well as several cool rewards and benefits that you can get if you pledge to the Kickstarter.
I don't know the video game, and I don't know what it's happening right now, but it sounds pretty darn awesome.
Again, you guys have been incredible. I couldn't be more blessed. Thank you all for the support that you have shown already. And also,
so
I will be
humble.
holding a live stream, hopefully next week, where I'm going to be looking at several of the scary ARG and analog horror and other creepy internet whatever horror series that you all recommend. That live stream will be on this channel. Be sure to check the community tab whenever I get a more concrete time. But it'll be a good time. You'll get hours of content of watching me be scared, and hopefully we can raise some money for the Kickstarter. But seriously,
I love horror. I keep mishearing it because of the difference in our accents. I know he's saying horror, but my ears is saying horror. I'm sorry. I know he's saying horror.
thank you all so much for what you've done. Thank you for allowing this project to get as big as it has. Let's get it the rest of the way there. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. Now, Castle Itter is an old landmark in the Austrian countryside. Its history dates back to at least the 13th century. But for the sake of our story, we're interested in its history during World War II. Whenever Germany took over Austria, they began to amass a lot of the land and landmarks for themselves. Now, Castle Itter was a desirable location not only because it looks cool, but also because a castle is a naturally good fortification. In the early years of the war, political leaders used it as a secret meeting location. However, in 1943, it became a part of the Dachau concentration camp. Now, several of you are probably familiar with the infamy of Dachau and several of the atrocities committed at the camp itself, but Dachau also had several properties in its proximity that it would use for transporting goods and weapons or stationing officers or what have you. So in 1943, it grabbed Castle Itter and began to use it as a prison for its important prisoners. And it had some very important prisoners. In the early years of its operation, it had the former Italian Prime Minister Francesco Nitti, as well as the former President of France, Albert Lebrun. And using a castle as a prison made a lot of sense. It only has one entrance, is heavily fortified on all sides, and is very easy to defend. And
so these are French celebrities. So ex-prime ministers. Okay. Do you think there was any element of this was a branch of Dachau where it was, I don't know, like a little bit more? Am I wrong in thinking that it's a little bit more kind of fancier? I don't think that would have been that much of a priority of the Nazis, but I don't know. Maybe are they keeping them in a slightly less populated prison? And maybe it's less, typhoidy, or is that right?
the prisoners who were put at Itter were kept in relatively good conditions. See, the Germans knew that it may be beneficial to have these former political leaders in good health, because in the future they could probably use them for leverage.
Yeah.
Several of the prisoners who stayed there described the experience as being very bizarre, because while they couldn't leave, they each had their own room, they had a free roam of the hallways, they could go out to the courtyard and exercise when they wanted, and while the guards would be rude if, they ever asked for anything too extraneous, most of the prisoners said the guards would try to be their friend. At the end of
that, I'm really struggling to get my head around any type of Nazi confinement. I know it's not technically a camp, but it's like a kind of like a sister location of Dachau. The idea that in this one particular location, these particular prisoners were kept in much better conditions. I mean, it's a significant improvement from the lives of anyone kept in any of the other camps, isn't it? That is such a stark contrast. I actually didn't know about this place at all, so I don't know how I feel about that. It just feels gross because you just associate those camps with the most disgusting conditions that killed so many people.
the war, several of the prisoners present included the sister of French free leader Charles Gaulle, two former French prime ministers, several French generals, and even French Olympic tennis athlete Jean Borotra.
So
Again, all highly regarded individuals of France who Germany thought may be useful. One interesting detail is that apparently several of these people hated each other because a bunch of the politicians who were locked up were like far right and far left. And then you had several fighters and generals of the French army who were in there at the same time as politicians who were favorable of Germany at the beginning of the war. So apparently the German guards never had to worry about them planning an escape because they could never get along with each other long enough to actually plan something. Now, as mentioned earlier, Itter was a part of the Dachau concentration camp, and the concentration camps were staffed by SS members. Because of that, the head at Castle Itter was a man named Sebastian Weimar, a high-ranking officer in the SS. So, as the war was coming to a close, things got a lot more tumultuous at the castle. At the beginning it started off slow, like in 1945 the supply lines got low, so instead of lighting the castle with light bulbs that were ran by a generator, they had to begin using candles. Near the end of the war, the prisoners had a meeting with Weimar and essentially asked if things got really bad, if they were going to, be executed. And Weimar made the good point that it would not be in his interest, as someone who's already going to get in a lot of trouble for being an SS officer, to execute a bunch of important people at the end of the war for no reason.
Yeah, but the caveat to that is if he was already aware that his crimes were unforgivable, he wasn't just going to get in a lot of trouble for what had happened. He was probably going to be hung or executed. Knowing that, is his mentality going to be more along the lines of, well, I've already got a death sentence, so it doesn't really matter how I treat you or what I do to you. So I don't know.
And he said that if it came down to it, he would make sure they had a way out. Well, in late April, as the final
Doing a lot
weeks
of
of the
fidgeting,
war were
sorry.
beginning, the castle became a checkpoint for SS officers who were trying to escape the Allies. Several of the officers who worked at the Dachau concentration camps would come to the castle and get their families and supplies together before making a run for it. Because again, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, a lot of the SS did not have an option other than get out or fight. This culminated when on April 30th, Edward Wieder showed up to the castle. Edward Wieder is known as the Butcher of Dachau because he was the head of the Dachau concentration camp. And whenever he left for the castle at the end of April, he ordered the execution of the 2,000 remaining prisoners. April 30th was also the same day Hitler died, so whenever the Butcher massacred that many people on the same day that it was very apparent Germany was not going to win this thing, he took the third option and shot himself in the heart while he was in Castle Itter on May the 2nd. Which, funny side note, there is a village known as Village Itter at the base of Castle Itter, because the way it used to be set up in Europe is there'd be a big castle, then a village built next to it. So his men tried to bury him in the cemetery at Village Itter, and the priest of the town began to fight them and essentially say he doesn't want a murderer buried in his yard because duh. So they just buried him at an unmarked grave just outside the castle wall. It was at this point, after watching his boss commit Battlefield 5 exit lobby, that the head of Castle Itter, Weimar, decided to get out. So on May the 4th, Weimar begins to make a run for it. However, the prisoners protested, saying, hey, what happened to the whole you're gonna let us go thing? And Weimar says that he will make sure that they are guarded so that no danger befalls them. And
that's assuming what, that the Allied forces are going to liberate this place. What happens if no one turns up? How long are they going to be guarded for? How long are they going to be manned before those soldiers sod off because they're worried what's going to happen to them?
all that Weimar did to ensure they were taken care of was, as he was making a run for it, he found an injured SS officer who had defected from the SS and asked him to put on his uniform and go protect the castle by himself. This SS officer, who to my understanding the name has been lost to history, had become injured in battle months prior and decided to leave the SS as he became disillusioned with it. So I guess he was just like, sure, I'll die protecting a bunch of French people, why not? Also, after Weimar left, all of the guards at the prison decided to leave as well. So,
right? Yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's obviously going to happen. So these prisoners are just going to be left to fend for themselves.
So by May the 4th, it was an entire castle of French prisoners and one not SS guard, and that was it. Now, the prisoners made the logical conclusion, considering that the SS soldiers in the area were desperate, that they weren't just going to leave a castle to itself. They would either storm in there and kill the French to take the castle as a defensive position, or just because they really don't have anything else going for them. So the French prisoners broke into the castle's armory that the Germans had just left intact, and they all began to arm themselves. Okay. Now, logically, they figured that they themselves were not going to be able to hold out against an entire SS regime. So they began to develop a plan in order to get some help. At this time, the Americans were moving across the Austrian countryside, securing each village one at a time.
So they're putting all of their hopes in the Americans finding them fairly soon, because, I mean, what do they do for food?
So naturally, the Americans would be on their way to secure Castle and Village Itter. So all they need to do is go find one of those American patrols and let them know that, hey, there's an empty castle. You should probably do something about that. Now, this part is a bit of a historical discrepancy. I've read a lot of sources on this story, and they seem to be kind of split on what exactly happened. Some say one of the prisoners tricked the guards on May the 3rd in order to sneak out, and then he went to go contact the Americans, and then someone else went on May the 4th. However, Stephen Harding, who wrote the book on this story titled The Last Battle, believes that it was just one individual who went to both groups. And since, he wrote the book, I'm going to go with his interpretation. So according to Harding, it was one Yugoslavian prisoner by the name of Andre. Despite being a Yugoslavian, he was transferred to the castle at the end of the war because the castle needed electrical work and Andre was an electrician.
Oh, my next question was literally just going to be, well, this is a upmarket prison for, French celebrities. Why is this random Yugoslavian person been sent here? It's because he's an electrician. Okay.
So on May the 4th, those who could speak English at the castle wrote out a message on a note that said something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm trapped in a castle and we're all gonna die, please help," and gave it to Andre so that whenever he runs into American forces, he could just show them that note, and hopefully they could put him in contact with someone who speaks German. So Andre hops on a motorcycle and begins to make his way to a nearby village known as Virgil. While on his way to Virgil, he was stopped by a group of Austrian freedom fighters on a house just outside of the village. Turns out there was a whole deployment of SS soldiers in Virgil, so it's good Andre didn't make it there. Andre explained to the freedom fighters, which was mostly composed of citizens of Austria who were fighting against the remnants of the German soldiers, that his objective was to make it to the Americans. The Austrians introduced them to their leader, the Wehrmacht Major, Joseph Gongol. Gongol was a very high-ranking German major. He had fought through the entirety of the war for the German army on the Eastern Front against the Russians, and then even at the Battle of Normandy against the Americans. However, as the war went on, he became disillusioned with the German sentiment, and at the tail end of it, defected and began leading the Austrian freedom fighters against the remaining Germans.
Okay.
Gongol's forces were composed of himself, about 20 Wehrmacht soldiers who followed him, along with the volunteering Austrian freedom fighters. So Andre comes to this German major and explains the whole story, that there's French VIPs in a castle and they're probably going to get attacked by the SS. And Gongol says that he himself does not have the forces to help, but he bets the Americans do. So Gongol tells Andre to continue driving in one direction until he hits the Americans in a town about 20 miles away, while Gongol himself, along with his Wehrmacht soldiers, will go the other direction to where he thinks the Americans may be. So these two, a German major with a truckload of German soldiers, as well as a Yugoslavian prisoner who doesn't speak English, both set off to find American help. On Andre's side, he eventually makes it to an American deployment and hands them a letter, gets a translator, and explains everything. Okay. So they begin to travel with Andre back to the castle with a deployment of 4 tank destroyers and an infantry transport and jeeps and everything needed. However, on their way to the castle, they ran into a group of Austrian freedom fighters who were in a fight with German soldiers, and the convoy began taking artillery fire, so they had to stop. Meanwhile, Gongol made it to the nearby village of Kufstein, or Kufstein, I'm horrible with names. Gongol, driving his Kuppenwagen, which looks like this, was riding with a giant white flag hanging out the side of it, and whenever he made contact with the American tank division that was there, he got out and walked towards them holding the flag with his hands up, and was taken to the head of the 23rd Tank Battalion.
Okay.
Gongol explained the story, and the battalion asked for any volunteers. The volunteer who stepped up was First Lieutenant John C. Jack Lee Jr., which not only is one of the most American names ever, but for the duration of this video, I want you to imagine him as Lieutenant Aldo Raines from Inglourious Bastards, because that's exactly who this guy was. Despite joining the Army from New York, he was originally from Nebraska. And despite being only 27, he had commanded his N4 Sherman tank through France, Germany, and now Austria. As a matter of fact, the day previously, on May the 3rd, he was part of the battle that cleared the Kufstein village. So this guy is at the tail end of the war. He just fought the day before, but he decides to go fight to rescue a bunch of French prisoners. Whenever he signed up, his friend who was also a tank commander, Lieutenant Harry Bass, also volunteered to go along with him. So between the tanks and crew, at this point, it was 2 tanks and 8 volunteers. On top of that, 6 volunteers from the All-African American Company D of the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion rode on top. Whenever they left, the battalion also sent 5 more tanks with them for fire support. So this group of American tanks and German soldiers began to make their way back to Castle Itter.
This might sound like a stupid question, but I'm just going to ask it because it's in my head right now. Why do they need, or why do they feel that they need so much manpower when the Yugoslavian chap, the electrician, he's been at Castle Itter, hasn't he? So he knows it's not a manned post anymore. There's no one really there other than the prisoners that need assistance. They need help because that's why they need assistance, you know? Well, anyway, so why? So is it Vidar? Was that his name? He didn't want to go in the first place because he didn't believe he had the manpower to free the prisoners. But they don't need it, do they? Unless that maybe they're expecting to come across some SS forces on the way.
They got to the city of Virgil, as mentioned earlier, that was full of SS soldiers. However, when they get there, they find that the SS had just left. Afraid that the SS may try to retake the town, Lee leaves the 5 support tanks that had followed them at the town to defend it.
Okay.
About 4 miles from
Sensible.
Castle Itter, they passed the only bridge to the castle that had been wired to blow by the SS who had just left. Gongol soldiers, who know how to work German explosives, defuse the bomb, and after they cross the bridge, Lee leaves the other tank there in order to defend it. Because since that bridge is the only way Germans could get armor up to the castle, it's a good idea to make sure that doesn't happen. However, Henry Bass,
Right.
who's Lee's friend, refuses to get left behind on the action while Lee goes to the castle, so he leaves someone else in charge of his tank while he hops on Lee's tank and goes with him. So at this point, the group that's making their way to the castle is composed of 1 tank, 7 Americans in total, and Gongol and his 20 German soldiers. As they're making their way up to the castle, they round a turn and come across a group of SS soldiers who are trying to set up a roadblock.
Okay. I realised my previous question was a bit daft. Okay, this is the exact circumstance in which they definitely need the manpower. Okay. Shh. No, put me wrong.
They begin to shoot at the Germans on the road, to which Lee then tells the driver to gun it, and they all run up the road and make their way to the castle. And that roadblock was evidence that the SS were probably going to try to take the castle. Whenever they arrive, the French VIPs are not exactly thrilled, because think about it, they're afraid of a German attack. So they send Andre to go get help. And then the people who come back is 7 Americans, 1 tank,
Germans.
20 Germans, no way to get them out of the castle, and no Andre. Like I said, Stephen Harding is my primary source for this story, not only because I believe he's the most accurate, but also because he includes the funniest details. One of them being the French prime ministers who were at the castle said that Gongol, the German major, was very polite and kind, whereas Lee was, quote, crude in both looks and manners. Once they get to the castle, Lee has his tank placed in the entryway so that blocks the only means of anyone walking in.
Why would that be your first comment? Is to comment on what they look like and how polite they were. Okay, but you know, you've been rescued. Why do you care what those officers look like?
And after they get there, they get some food together for all the men that are present, and then apparently cracked open the wine cellar and started just having a party. Think about it. You have a bunch of French celebrities, a bunch of German foot soldiers, a variety of American soldiers, and they're all just having drinks and partying in a castle that's about to be invaded. That night, Lee, Bass, Gongol, and the aforementioned SS officer who was guarding the castle all went out and began to set up defensive positions if the SS were to attack. I would kill to have known what they talked about. 2 American tank commanders, a Wehrmacht major, and an SS officer all planning together. one of history's most bizarre moments. I wonder if any of them like took a moment to realize just the absurdity of it. Lee
That is a really weird thought, actually, isn't it? Like history's weirdest accumulation of selection of individuals. What would you talk about on that night before you're assuming you're going to be invaded? You could only really talk about the war, couldn't you? Or maybe that's the worst thing to talk about. What on earth would the conversation go like?
He certainly took the reins on the operation, and he recognized that they did not have the power to transport the prisoners out of the castle. So instead, Lee's reasoning was, for one, Andre is still out there hopefully getting help. Because if you remember, at this time, Andre got himself into another gunfight and wasn't able to make his way to the castle yet. And two, the Americans are continuing to take each village one at a time, and hopefully the front line would be here soon. So in the meantime, they were going to wait there until help arrived.
How many
and sure enough,
prisoners
it's good
are there
they
here?
planned the defense when they did, because at 11 o'clock that night, a group of SS soldiers attacked. They opened up with machine gun fire and began hitting the top of the castle wall. The defenders inside began to fire back. It was too dark to see anyone, and the entire battle was determined by tracer fire going back and forth in both directions. Slow gunfire continued all night long, with just enough contact being sustained to keep either side from pushing their luck. That was until dawn struck and people could actually see what they were shooting at. As soon as the SS could see, they began to fire an 88mm that they had stashed in the hillside the night prior. The first hit ripped through the castle wall, destroying a bunch of the rooms inside, before the 88 turned its attention on Lee's tank. The shot ripped through the tank, nearly killing the radio operator who was inside, and he just managed to get out before the fuel tank ignited and the tank blew up. So, while still blocking the main entryway, the tank was no longer usable. So because of that, the SS began to make their way to the east and west walls of the castle and tried to breach entry. As the gunfire began to heat up, Lee ordered the French prisoners back into the castle walls to protect themselves. However, they refused to leave and joined in on the fight. The SS soldiers on the ground began to throw grappling hooks up on the wall to try to climb over the castle wall that way, and the defenders on the walls would shoot down at them whenever they tried to climb. This went on for several hours, and I just want you to picture the image of Americans, Germans, and French all fighting together inside of the castle against other advancing Germans. Several of their French made their way to the top of the castle and began using the bolt-action rifles to pick off soldiers up in the tree line. Lee and Gongol went to the top of the castle wall and began to scope out machine gun positions. They were also trying to locate the 88mm, which had been very well hidden. A few of the defenders had been hit, although it wasn't enough on its own to risk defeat. And while I'm not exactly sure how it happened, some reports say that as he was trying to help one of the French prisoners inside of the castle, or while he was looking for the 88mm, Major Gongol was killed by sniper fire.
Oh no! Oh gosh! He's quite a handsome chap. I know we saw a picture of him earlier. I thought he was the American. It's the teeth. He has lovely teeth. Oh no!
The defenders continued to hold strong, however they were running out of ammunition and wouldn't be able to last for long. Now you may be thinking at this time, where is Andre at? Because that guy has spent like a day just hiding in the trees. Well, around this time at about noon on May the 5th, Andre and his group, led by Major John Kramers, had reached the village of Virgil and the bridge that Bass's tank was guarding. Kramers couldn't get into contact with Lee because, as mentioned, the radio in the tank was destroyed when, the tank blew up. So Kramers was trying to find a way to get in contact with Lee up at the castle to see how bad the situation was. And one of the Austrians said, "Have you tried calling him?" Because there was a phone line ran from the Virgil town hall to the castle. So Kramers calls the castle, and then in the middle of the shootout, one of the French pick up the phone. And then I assume by yelling, "It's for you," to Lee, Lee comes to the phone and begins to describe the situation to Kramers.
That would be the furthest thing from my mind. Can you imagine with all the gunfire? How did you even hear the phone? I just got this image of this, like the tennis player, whichever one he was, picking up the phone. Hello? Hello, Savannah? It's for you.
I'm at, like, you're in a gunfight in a derelict castle and the phone starts ringing and someone's like, oh, I better get that. So Lee explains, I need help, like now. And Kramers and his group begins to rush their way up to the castle. At this point, the defenders didn't have a lot of time left. The SS kept getting closer in the tree line. And apparently the road to get to the castle was very confusing. There was a ton of different turns through the village and different ways to drive through the forest. So Jean Borotra, the Olympic tennis athlete that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Jean. This is the one I imagine picking up the phone. Hello?
Who was familiar with the village, asked Lee if he could make a run for it to guide the tanks up the hillside. Lee tells him to do it, with the understanding that he may die. And as soon as a lull in gunfire hits, Jean vaults over the castle wall and then runs through the woods by several emplacements of SS soldiers and lives.
He was the man for the job, wasn't he? Yeah. The athlete. Pick him. If you go, you can vault over the castle wall. Just run.
I have absolutely no idea how that guy didn't die. For further comedic effect, you could do what I do and imagine him in like an Adidas tracksuit. So this guy sprints several miles down the hillside, finds the tank crew, and begins guiding them up the road to the castle. Meanwhile, in the castle, Lee is preparing for the worst case scenario, and as people are running out of ammo, he's ordering them to go into the castle and wait with knives. And when asked about it later, he said his plan was, if they ran out of ammo, they were each going to either get knives or just be ready to fight with their fist in like strategically placed positions throughout the castle's keep. Because, hey, I mean, that's what they were designed for in the first place, right? So might as well get medieval. So,
I mean, it's what you resort to in games. Playing video games, that's what happens. You run out of ammo, you've got your fists. Or knives, maybe, in their case. I just thought as well, it's a good thing that, the fact that Jean was able to sprint miles to go to try and, guide their tanks into the castle. They must have been kept in good conditions. I can't imagine there's many prisoners in any of the German camps that had the energy. If you're kept, a lot of these prisoners, they were kept in the most horrible conditions, and these guys were obviously kept very well, very hygienically. They're being fed.
So at around 3 p.m., almost everyone's out of ammo, and there's a bunch of very scared French and Germans inside of the castle ready to punch someone to death. The SS had made their way to the front gate and were about to storm into the courtyard of the castle itself when they were stopped by machine gun and tank fire from the now arriving American tanks. Kramer's group had just made it up the hill and began shooting at the SS that were making their way to the front, and whenever they began to fire, the SS retreated.
This is playing out in my head like a film, like a scene from a film. Oh, the Americans have turned up to save the day just in the nick of time.
One of the few remaining Wehrmacht soldiers who was still stationed at the top of the castle began to scream in joy, Amerikanische Panzer, which is German for American tank, which it's so wild. Again, I know I keep emphasizing the weirdness of the situation, but how can I not? A German soldier yelling American tank as if it's a good thing.
Yeah.
When throughout the rest of the war, it was a very bad thing. One of the reasons that the small details of this event are remembered so well is because in Kramer's group was a journalist who immediately began interviewing everyone and getting their take on what happened. And the journalist talked about the bizarre nature of coming into a medieval castle and seeing French, German, white and black Americans all gathered together behind a burning tank shooting at other Germans. So as everyone was cheering and happy, Lee walked out of the castle with a blank expression and
Like, that is so
walked
weird.
up to the officers who were standing next to Lee's burning tank. And without saying anything else, he just looked them in the eye and said, "So, what kept you?" And then they all
Like I say, this is playing out in my head like a film, like a movie. Oh my gosh, can you imagine?
broke out into laughter over the humor of almost dying. So there at the castle, the wounded were treated, and the French, who had been there for far too long at this point, were immediately evacuated away. Everyone was given awards. I imagine the Wehrmacht were treated a little bit better than the other Wehrmacht after the surrender. Lee was given a Distinguished Service Cross medal, a Silver Star, and even promoted to captain. Now, the only official death that took place on the Defenders' side was that of Major Gongle. Most reports list that he was the only one dead, and there was like 4 or 5 wounded. But I think what it actually was is that the Wehrmacht soldiers who were fighting alongside the Americans and French, there was no official record of them, at least on any capacity in the Ally side. So I think they just don't exist historically, but I think some of them did die, because in a lot of the reports there's mentions of them clearing the bodies, as in bodies plural, not just Gongle. So whenever you read about this story and it's like, yeah, there was 1 dead and a few more injured, I think that's one person who history cares about dead.
Yeah, one person of notoriety, or it's what the textbooks are like, isn't it? And it's so sad. I know I say it very often, but they only mention the political figures, or the names that history recognizes and remembers for whatever reason.
And then some defected Germans who no one really kept track of. But either way, it seems that there were no casualties on the French or American factions. And again, the only official death on the Defenders' part recorded that day was that of Major Gongle, and an unspecified number of SS troops who were killed on the offensive side. According to Stephen Harding, decades later, shortly before Lee passed away, he was asked about the Battle of Castle Itter and what he thought of it. And after thinking about the question, Lee sat there in silence for a while and then said, "Well, it was just the damnedest thing." And that is the story of one of the most underrated battles in the entirety of American warfare. And I, for one, am personally offended that it's not only talked about more, but also, why isn't there like a movie about this thing?
Right.
People make a movie out of every 2-sentence paragraph in history that's like, this group of people defended this location. But here's a story of like the weirdest team up ever defending a medieval castle in a gunfight that lasted for over 12 hours.
And the prisoners in the castle here are very notable people. They're celebrities, into 1940s celebrities. It's got all the makings of a Hollywood blockbuster. Why has it never been made into a film? It's actually, even the way that he's telling the story here, it's playing out in my head. And, it's got all the hallmark signs of a movie. The Americans just arrive just at the right second, at the right time. They storm in to save the day. There's like this melting pot of different people. Why has it not been made into a film?
You've got Olympic athletes vaulting over hillsides and running through German lines, and you've got these German snipers shooting at German majors, and then these French prisoners. Like, you can do so much with this.
And you've got the German officer Gongle, who's changed his way of thinking towards the end of the war, and he wants to, come onto the other side, and he's fighting like it's like he's got a redemption arc. So much going on here.
I am bothered. I will be having my people, in other words me and Kayla, in contact with Quentin Tarantino's legal team tonight if I have to.
Yes.
This is a fantastic story, and I think it's one that deserves to be told, which is why I wanted to tell it. And hopefully, if you stuck around this long, you think it's interesting as well, and that's cool, because I do too. And I just want to say, Thank you for watching. I didn't know about this story until recently. I was doing research for, again, the mega ultra World War II video I keep hyping up that I'm inevitably going to overhype. And I was looking at stories of like defectors and spies, and there was like a parenthesis at the end of a sentence that said something to the effect of, this is in contrast to when the Germans and Americans fought side by side at the Battle of Castle Itter. And I was just like, the what?
I've never
like I
heard of
found this off a rabbit hole. It reminds me of the Akali raft video I did about I called it like the not safe for work raft or whatever. Like that whole story that came to me whenever I was researching like disturbing human experiments. And then that was one of them, and a parenthesis said, although the authority of this story has been debated. Like I find out about the weirdest topics through footnotes. And I love it. I love doing this. I love this job. Love that I can envelop myself in research and then just chase these rabbit trails that become videos. And you guys are so fantastic for allowing me that, and it means a lot. We're at 1.67. Yeah, I think that's not a real number. You guys are great. I love you all to death. Thank you for that. Oh, 1.67 million subscribers, I should clarify. Thank you all so much for that. You mean the world. Thank you for getting me to this point. If you can't tell, I'm coming off of some kind of flu, sickness, something, and my voice is a little sparse, so I'm going to cut this outro short. Because it hurts a lot. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out, again, it'll be linked in the description, the Shadow of the Zone film. I'm very proud of the work we've already done for it. Hopefully the work we'll continue to do for it. So be on the lookout for that. Hopefully a live stream happening soon that I will probably post. My current plan, this may change, is to post the unedited live stream on the second channel, and maybe like a sizzle reel or greatest moments, whatever, to this channel. We'll see though. But please check out that Kickstarter. It would mean a lot. I really appreciate it. You all have already pushed it to a level I couldn't imagine. And just thank you all for that. You guys are the best. So again, check that out. But that should do it for now. So I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank you for that video. Very, very interesting. I had no idea. I have never heard of Itter Castle, the battle at Itter Castle. I've never heard of it up until now. So love the videos. He's just the most humble person. He just says thank you. I think about 20 times every video, thanking everybody. Guys, if you have not done at this point already, then please make your way over to Wedigoon's channel and like and subscribe, show him some love. I love his videos. I really, really do. I love you can see the amount of time that's gone into the research that he puts into the videos. And like myself, I think he's a bit of a chatterer. Bless him, saying he's going to keep the outro short because he's got a sore throat and he's still chatting away. Twinsies are the same. Honestly, I don't know when to shut up. Oh my gosh. Well, Sea of Whiskey, thank you very much for requesting that video. Very, very interesting. Again, I've never heard even of any instance of that happening throughout history. And it's got all the makings of a good Hollywood blockbuster movie. So I can't understand why it's not actually been picked up on anyone's radar, and and it baffles me. Absolutely baffles me. But it does need to be a film. I think it'd make a good one as well. Guys, thank you very much for watching along with me. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.